Hey guys, Teal here. If you've been wondering what operating system I used to make my last video, and still use to this day, it's Linux. Arch Linux, by the way. Many of you have heard this name before, but you might be wondering, how is this possible? Why did I do it? What happened? And what can you do to do the same thing? I'll be trying to answer all of these questions and more in this video, so stick around and pay attention. Let's get right to my experience with using Arch Linux, shall we? Now, I wasn't always a Linux user. In fact, I've used Windows nearly all the time before I switched. But wait a minute, how is Windows any different from Linux? Well, they're both operating systems, right? I'm sure you're familiar with what an operating system is. It's the software that manages computer hardware and software resources and provides common services for computer programs. The software that lets you run Google Chrome, Adobe Premiere Pro, OBS, and other programs that you might have heard of, and decides what to do with your hardware according to what changes you make in these programs, like managing files on your hard drive. You may also know that you can interact with your OS as a user. I mean, you're using an OS on your device right now. I feel like you should have known this already.
Have I been using an OS this whole time?
And indeed, Windows is an operating system, but it's not exactly the case with Linux, because it is actually a kernel in which many distributions of it are made, such as Ubuntu and Linux Mint. The kernel is basically the core of an OS, and the first difference we can see is that Windows and the many Linux distros, as Linux enthusiasts call them, run on different kernels. Sounds like a problem if you want all of your apps to work properly when moving from one system to another, because not every program is compatible with both Windows and Linux, now are they? And that is indeed the case, but we'll get to that later. Because of Windows and these Linux distros using different kernels, they also have similar but different functionalities and features and different ways of handling changes. They might appear to do the same things, but under the hood, they use different code to make those things happen. You got all that? If so, then why don't I tell you about my experience with Linux before the switch happened? My interest in Linux started around 2023, where I saw a bunch of videos related to it and used Manjaro Linux alongside my Windows PC. My dad also used Manjaro as his main operating system for quite a while now, and he was the one to suggest the idea of trying out Arch Linux and switching to it from Windows. At the time, we hadn't tried any other Linux distro besides Ubuntu and maybe Pop! OS, so we thought it would be a great idea. However, this meant that I had to give up all of my files left over from Windows. And I remember being so hesitant to the idea of switching to Linux. What will happen to all my files? Will they still work? What will happen to all the apps I installed on Windows? What if they stop working for some reason? How am I supposed to use Linux if I can't use all my stuff? Those and probably more are the kinds of questions I asked. I was so worried that my files and everything wouldn't work properly, but Dad calmly reassured me and promised we would make everything work on Arch Linux. Spoiler, we only managed to make most things work. Because Linux is so open source, it is very easy to interact with the kernel and everything directly, which also means it is very easy to make mistakes and not know what you need to be doing, so I had to prepare myself. I watched a bunch of Linux administrator tutorials, most of them coming from Learn Linux TV. I highly recommend you check their videos out if you're a Linux beginner, and learned all the necessary commands for whatever I needed to be doing, such as bash scripting and checking for updates. By then, Dad and I had managed to switch out of my old laptop that was running Manjaro to a new laptop that ran Arch, and I practiced my commands and other knowledge through that. I was so prepared that I became ready to fully transition from Windows to Arch, and oh boy did Dad and I manage to do that. If you've been in the Linux community for a while, you would know that Arch is more of a do-it-yourself type of distro, rather than a distro like Ubuntu or Debian, meaning it's more flexible and up-to-date. But this also means you have to do a lot of research and figure out the problems yourself. That's right, you have to find the solutions yourself. Isn't that revolutionary? If you're not the kind of guy that wants to find their own answers, then aren't you a lazy little bit. Like with most distros, you don't have to do everything yourself. That's why automation is encouraged in using Linux commands, fun fact. But Arch Linux and a few others does require you to do the problem solving more than what most other Linux distros require you to do. This is the main reason as to why people who have used Arch for much longer will tell you to read the wiki. If you find any problems relating to your Arch system, it is best to find something that relates to your problems through there. Dad and I have definitely visited the wiki a bunch of times for things we needed to do to set up our Arch system, such as figuring out what to do with Arch install and finding the necessary programs to make everything work as it should. We've seen a bunch of Arch installation videos before, so we thought it would be a good idea to install Arch on that new laptop I mentioned earlier, and then buy a new PC to install Arch on while still keeping the Windows PC until I felt like I was ready to switch. So, how did we do? It went well enough for us, actually. There, I said it. Arch Linux is easy. No, but really, we didn't have many major issues as you may have thought. We did have to go through Arch install and the manual method several times, but that was for testing what we really want our Arch Linux system to have and checking if everything went smoothly. You might be tempted to do the more popular method of installing Arch and recite the Holy Scriptures of Linux onto your terminal, but I don't think it's worth it. I know there are some people out there that strongly encourage you to type out this huge list of commands, but if this is one of your first few times installing Arch and are not confident enough to deal with the command line, then use Arch install. I will show you how both methods work later on, but it's basically a really convenient option for you if you don't want to go through this elaborate process. Don't feel pressured by whatever guy is out there trying to make you do it. With that being said, we have indeed made a few mistakes while making our Arch installations using Arch install and the manual method, but that is just part of the process. You make mistakes and you learn how to deal with them. Simple as that. And eventually, Dad and I pulled it off. We got our web browser of choice ready, we got our Office suite ready, we even got a virtual machine program for whatever I need to use Windows exclusive programs such as paint.net. We have managed to find a solution to most things. I say most because there was this one program that we struggled to run during our time with Arch Linux. A program so resistant to running we had to give up trying because it wasn't worth our time. That program being Roblox. Remember what I told you about the fact that not every program is compatible with both Windows and Linux? This is one of them. No matter what methods we used to get it working, or how many tutorials we followed, we just could not get it working. We've tried using wine and it failed. We've tried using forks of wine such as citrus and grape juice and it also failed. We've even tried uninstalling and reinstalling the stupid blocks of robots to see if it would succeed, and it failed. It's almost as if Roblox doesn't want us Linux folk to install their game freely with no issues at all. Thankfully, as of August 2024, there is a method that works, thank Google, and it's called Sober. It is an unofficial port of Roblox to Linux with up to twice the performance of native Windows. I highly recommend you install using Flatpak and play your Roblox games you've been desperately wanting to play. This is the only method I know so far that works reliably, and it has been a lifesaver for me. Let me know if there are any other methods I should try out in the comments. Apart from that, there was also paint.net that didn't natively work on Linux, as I mentioned earlier, since it uses the NET framework, which is difficult for Windows compatibility layers such as Wine, and thus there are no reliable Linux workarounds. But we got it working through a virtual machine program called Virtual Machine Manager. Kinda like VMware, but it's simpler in my opinion. Basically, beware of programs that can't natively run on Linux and use a virtual machine program or reliable Linux alternatives or ports if you can. Wow, that was a lot of yapping, wasn't it? With all this talk about my personal experiences with using Arch Linux, you may be wondering how you can install it yourself. I mean, I already kinda told you a few minutes ago, but if you want to know the exact process of installing Arch Linux, then listen up, because you want to follow this process very closely. Things are about to get real. First thing you need to do is to get an ISO for Arch Linux using this link, where you will find the option to download the latest torrent. It is generally recommended you use either the torrent or the magnet link in order to get the ISO. So download the link and use a torrent program such as uTorrent or BitTorrent to receive your ISO from there. Just to make sure your image isn't malicious, it is best if you verify its image signature before you boot it to a flash drive or optical disk by downloading GNU-PG into your system and following this command. Once it's done, you can now safely write the ISO into your installation media using an ISO writer program of your choice and boot the live environment onto your machine. From there, you can log in as root and type in iwctl to set up your Wi-Fi, then use the following commands displayed here. If you want to make sure you have a connection, type in ping and whatever website you want to test, and see if it transmits and receives the same number of packages, usually 5 or 10. And once everything's ready, you can either go and recite the ever so fabled Holy Scriptures onto the terminal listed in the Arch Wiki's installation guide down in the description for those of you who want to know the exact specifics, or go for the easier route and use Arch install. Basically, for the installation guide, after you boot the live environment, it recommends you to use lowercase instead font to set the keyboard layout and console font, cat, sys, firmware, EFI, FW platform size to verify the boot mode, time, date, CTL to set the time and date of your system, go through the internet step we described earlier, fdisk to partition the disk, and KFS whatever file system you want to format the partitions using a file system of your choice, mkswap to format a swap partition, mount and swap on to mount the file systems and swap, select the mirrors, install the essential packages using Packstrap, those being base Linux and Linux firmware, and use all of these commands to configure the system before finally rebooting it. Whew, that was a lot of stuff to get through. Almost as much as the amount I had to get through your mom. There's a reason why the Arch install script was created in the first place. To automate this entire process into a simple console GUI where you go through each process one by one without having to type out dozens of commands. As I have said before, it is a really convenient option for you if you want an easy way out and don't want to go through all this mess, whether you're a Linux veteran or a newbie just starting out. All you have to do using this method is choose your locals, mirrors, disk configuration, swap, bootloader, hostname and root password, user accounts, desktop environment, audio, network configuration, additional packages and repositories, and time zone before you save your configuration and boot into your new system. Just like that. Much time saved and such a simple setup process. This is why I personally recommend you use Arch install over following the installation guide. Not even a TLDR can cover the list of all the commands you have to go through when using the guide method. Any other programs you might have missed while installing using either method can be installed after you boot into your desktop and access the terminal. So, what do we learn from this? Well, to sum it up, installing and using Arch Linux can be a really fun experience if you play your cards right, and the worst desktop experience you've ever had in your life if you don't know what you're doing. With Arch being a DIY distro means your decisions have more of an impact on the system and your experience with it than most other distros. Since it is easy to make mistakes with these kinds of distros, and really most of Linux in general, most users end up having to scramble to find bug fixes, various patches, and other methods of repairing the things they've broken, which is certainly not fun to deal with. Many people claim Arch Linux to be the final boss of Linux because of how difficult it can be to install it, but I disagree. Not only because it was my first real dive into the world of Linux, but because most people aren't aware of the ways they can make working with Arch easier, thus struggling to make their system usable. Those were the ways Dad and I managed to find and make the whole process go so smoothly. So the next time you try out something as difficult as this, see if you can find an easier way of doing it. Work smarter, not harder. Unless you're trying to install Gen 2, then may Google have mercy on your soul. Hey! With all that said, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to get notified whenever a new video comes out. I'll see you guys again in the next video, which is gonna come out hopefully sometime this year. If not, there's always next year. And yeah, see you guys later. Bye!